Had when humanity's greatest heroes emerge from the most unexpected places, the universe learns that compassion knows no species boundaries. Today's story proves that sometimes the most ordinary job can lead to the most extraordinary acts of courage, and that evil never expects resistance from someone society has forgotten. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the industrial waste district of New Phoenix City as David Mitchell pulled his rumbling sanitation truck to a stop beside another overflowing dumpster. The smell hit him first, as it always did. Rotting food, industrial chemicals, and something else he could never quite identify but had learned to ignore after 15 years on the job. Dave wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove and checked his watch. 3 hours into his shift, and he was already running behind schedule. New Phoenix wasn't like other cities. Built on the ruins of old Phoenix after the climate wars, it sprawled endlessly in all directions, a maze of towering apartment blocks, industrial zones, and forgotten neighborhoods where people lived who didn't officially exist. Dave's route took him through the worst of it. District 47, where the city dumped everything it wanted to forget. The unemployment offices didn't send people here for job interviews. This was where you ended up when the system had given up on you. Dave had been one of those forgotten people once. After his discharge from the service, when the nightmares made it impossible to hold down anything that required interaction with people, sanitation work had saved his life. Nobody bothered a garbage man. Nobody asked questions. You showed up, did the work, went home. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest, and honest work was getting harder to find these days. He activated the truck's hydraulic lift and watched as another load of human refuse disappeared into the compactor. Cardboard boxes, broken electronics, spoiled food, and the endless stream of disposable items that kept the economy moving. Sometimes, he found things that made him wonder about the people who threw them away. Family photos, children's toys, wedding rings. Each piece of trash told a story, though Dave had learned not to think too hard about those stories. The next stop was building 847, a crumbling tenement that housed mostly immigrants and refugees. Official refugees, the ones with papers and permission to be here. Dave knew there were others, the unofficial ones, but that wasn't his business. His business was collecting garbage, not asking questions about who generated it. As he maneuvered the truck into position, something felt different about this pickup. The usual crowd of kids who gathered to watch the big truck work weren't around. The windows in the building that normally showed signs of life were dark. Even the street vendors, who usually called out greetings, were nowhere to be seen. An uncomfortable silence had settled over the block like a heavy blanket. Dave shrugged off the feeling and got back to work. The dumpster behind building 847 was fuller than usual, packed tight with bags that looked like they'd been thrown in. Hastily, some had burst open, spilling their contents across the alley floor. As he prepared to dump the container, a sound stopped him cold. It was soft, barely audible over the truck's engine, but unmistakably the sound of something alive. Something small and frightened. Dave killed the engine and listened. There it was again, coming from inside the dumpster. A muffled whimpering like a kitten trapped in a box. Dave had found animals before. Usually cats or dogs that had gotten themselves stuck while foraging for food. He kept a pair of thick gloves in his cab for just these situations. But as he climbed up to look into the dumpster, what he saw made his blood run cold. Wedged between a torn garbage bag and a broken television was a small figure, no bigger than a toddler, but definitely not human. The skin was a pale blue-gray color, smooth and translucent enough that Dave could see dark veins underneath. Large eyes, too large for the small face, blinked up at him with a mixture of terror and hope. The creature was wearing what looked like the remnants of clothing, torn and stained with something that might have been blood. Dave's military training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what he was seeing. Threat assessment. The creature was clearly injured, definitely scared, and obviously not from Earth. That should have been impossible. First contact protocols existed for a reason, and they didn't involve finding aliens in garbage dumpsters. But impossible or not, there was a childlike being looking up at him with eyes that held far too much pain for something so small. The creature tried to speak, but only managed a weak sound that might have been words in a language Dave didn't recognize. Then he heard something that chilled him to the bone. Heavy footsteps approaching from the street, accompanied by voices speaking in clipped, authoritative tones. Whatever had put this small being in the garbage was coming back. Dave's instincts screamed at him to make a choice, and fast. The voices were getting closer, speaking in a language that sounded harsh and mechanical. Without thinking, he reached into the dumpster and carefully lifted the small alien creature out, surprised by how light it felt in his arms. The being looked up at him with those enormous eyes and whispered something that sounded almost like gratitude. He carried the creature quickly to his truck, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, and placed it gently in the passenger seat. The being was shivering, whether from cold or fear, Dave couldn't tell. He grabbed an old blanket from behind the seat and wrapped it around the small form, then started the engine and drove away from Building 847 as casually as he could manage. 3 blocks away, Dave pulled into an abandoned loading dock and killed the engine. His hands were shaking as he turned to look at his unexpected passenger. The creature had stopped shivering and was watching him with what seemed like cautious curiosity. Up close, Dave could see that the injuries were worse than he'd first thought. There were marks around the being's wrists that looked like restraints, and several cuts on its arms that appeared to be healing but were still fresh. Dave had seen enough wounded soldiers to recognize trauma when he saw it. This wasn't just physical injury. This was the look of someone who had been through hell and wasn't sure if they were safe yet. He reached slowly into his lunchbox and pulled out a bottle of water and a sandwich. The creature's eyes widened at the sight of food, and Dave realized it had probably been in that dumpster for quite some time. The being accepted the water gratefully, drinking it slowly while keeping those large eyes fixed on Dave's face. When Dave unwrapped the sandwich and offered half, the creature hesitated for a moment before taking it. As it ate, Dave noticed that its hands were similar to human hands, but with an extra finger and what looked like small sucker pads on the fingertips. Dave cleared his throat softly and spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. The creature looked up at him and began to speak in that unknown language, gesturing with its free hand. The tone was desperate, pleading, and even though Dave couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. This being was asking for help. After several minutes of one-sided conversation, the creature seemed to realize that Dave couldn't understand. It pointed to itself and said something that sounded like Kira. Dave nodded and pointed to himself. David. Dave. The creature repeated his name carefully, the pronunciation slightly off but recognizable. Kira pulled something from the folds of its torn clothing, a small device that looked like it might once have been some kind of communicator. It was cracked and dark, obviously broken. Kira held it up to Dave and made a frustrated sound, then pointed toward the sky and back to the device. Dave was beginning to understand. Kira was trying to contact someone, probably someone not on Earth. Dave looked at his watch and realized he'd been gone from his route for almost 30 minutes. His supervisor would start asking questions soon, and Dave couldn't afford to lose this job. But as he looked at Kira's hopeful expression, he knew he couldn't just drive back to the depot and pretend this hadn't happened. Whatever had put this child in a garbage dumpster like refuse was still out there and might be looking for it. He made a decision that would change everything. Dave reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah Chun had been working on his truck's transmission last month, and during one of their conversations, she'd mentioned some unusual modifications she'd been making to vehicles for certain clients. Modifications that most mechanics wouldn't know how to do. Sarah answered on the second ring. Chun's garage, what's broken now? Dave could hear the sound of welding in the background. Sarah, it's Dave Mitchell. I need a favor, and it's not about my truck. Dave paused, trying to figure out how to explain without sounding completely insane. I've got a situation here, and I think you might be the only person I know who could help. There was a moment of silence, then Sarah's voice came back more serious. What kind of situation, Dave? Dave looked at Kira, who was watching him, with those impossibly large eyes. The kind where someone small and helpless got thrown away like garbage, and the people who did it are probably looking for them. He hesitated. Sarah, have you ever worked on anything that wasn't exactly standard? Earth technology? Another pause, longer this time. Dave, where are you right now? Old loading dock on Industrial Boulevard, about 6 blocks from your shop. Dave could hear Sarah moving around, the sound of tools being put away. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. Don't call anyone else, and don't let anyone see you. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The line went dead. Dave put his phone away and looked at Kira. Help is coming, he said, hoping his tone would convey reassurance, even if the words meant nothing. Kira seemed to understand anyway, settling back into the blanket with something that might have been relief. As they waited, Dave found himself thinking about the voices he'd heard at Building 847. They hadn't sounded human, now that he thought about it. The cadence was wrong, too precise, too cold. And the timing of finding Kira in the garbage right before those voices arrived couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had thrown this child away and come back to make sure the job was done. The sound of an approaching vehicle made Dave tense, but it was Sarah's battered pickup truck pulling into the loading dock. Sarah Chun was a small woman with grease permanently embedded under her fingernails and an expression that said she'd seen more than most people twice her age. She climbed out of her truck and walked over to Dave's passenger window, then stopped, dead when she saw Kira. Well, Sarah said after a long moment, that explains a lot about some of the work I've been doing lately. She opened the truck door carefully and crouched down to Kira's eye level. Hello there, little one. You're safe now. To Dave's amazement, Kira responded in what sounded like broken English. Safe? The word was heavily accented, but unmistakable. Sarah nodded. Safe, we're going to help you. She looked up at Dave. Follow me back to the shop. We need to get off the street, and I've got some people you both need to meet. Sarah's garage sat at the end of a dead-end street in the industrial district, a converted warehouse that looked like it had seen better decades. From the outside, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed to be, a rundown auto repair shop specializing in keeping old vehicles running. But as Dave followed Sarah's truck through the main bay doors, he quickly realized that appearances could be deceiving. The garage was much larger inside than it had seemed from the street, with work bays that stretched back into shadows. What caught Dave's attention immediately was that not all of the vehicles being worked on looked entirely familiar. He could see what appeared to be a normal delivery van, but it had been modified with panels that didn't match any Earth technology he recognized. Another vehicle looked like it had started life as a city bus, but now sported additional compartments and what might have been armor plating. Sarah parked and gestured for Dave to pull into an empty bay near the back of the garage. As he turned off his engine, Dave noticed several people emerging from various workstations. They moved with the casual alertness of people who were used to unexpected visitors but weren't taking any chances. Kira had gone very still in the passenger seat, those large eyes scanning the approaching humans with obvious wariness. Dave reached over and gently touched the small being's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "These are Sarah's friends." A tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command approached Dave's truck. His clothes were civilian, but everything about his posture screamed military background. Behind him came a younger woman with short-cropped hair, carrying what looked like a medical kit, and an older man whose calloused hands suggested he was more comfortable with tools than weapons. Sarah made the introductions quickly. "Dave, this is Captain Torres, retired Air Force. Elena is our medic, and Marcus handles our technical modifications." She gestured toward Kira. "And this little one is why we've all been working so hard lately." Torres stepped closer to the truck, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. Mitchell, Sarah tells me you found this child in unusual circumstances. Before we go any further, I need you to understand that what you've stumbled into is bigger than a single rescue. Are you prepared for that?" Dave looked down at Kira, who was clutching the blanket tightly and watching the conversation with obvious intelligence despite the language barrier. "Captain, I found a kid thrown away like garbage. Whatever comes after that, I can handle." Elena moved forward with her medical kit. "May I examine the child? I can see from here that there are injuries that need attention." Her voice was gentle, professional, the tone of someone who had treated trauma victims before. Kira seemed to understand the medical intent and allowed Elena to approach. As the medic began a careful examination, speaking in soothing tones, Sarah gestured for Dave and Torres to step aside. "3 months ago," Sarah began, keeping her voice low, "we started finding them. Alien refugees, hidden in the city, trying to stay invisible. Most of them were injured, all of them were terrified. They spoke of something they called collectors, beings who traveled from world to world, harvesting what they considered valuable specimens." Torres picked up the explanation. Earth wasn't supposed to be involved. These refugees were fleeing through our solar system when their transport was attacked. Some of them made it to the surface and have been hiding ever since, trying to contact rescue ships or find some way off-world. Dave felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "In the garage. And these collectors? They've been hunting the survivors," Sarah said grimly. "Systematically. They pose as immigration enforcement, using forged credentials that fool most human authorities. They locate the refugees, capture them, and then—" She paused, looking toward Kira. "They dispose of any they consider damaged or unfit for transport." Marcus, the technical specialist, joined their conversation. "We've been trying to help them stay hidden, modifying vehicles for emergency evacuations, setting up safe houses. But the collectors are getting more aggressive. Yesterday, we lost contact with an entire family we were protecting." Elena finished her examination of Kira and approached the group. Multiple healed fractures, evidence of prolonged restraint, and severe dehydration. "This child has been captive for some time." Her professional composure slipped slightly. "There are also signs that someone attempted to remove what appears to be some kind of biological implant. The surgery was recent and not performed by anyone with medical training." Dave's jaw tightened. "They tried to cut something out of a child?" "Probably a tracking device," Torres said. "The refugees we've helped before all had them. Bio-integrated technology that allows the collectors to monitor their location and vital signs. Removing them is dangerous without proper equipment." Sarah pulled out a tablet and showed Dave a series of surveillance photos. They showed tall figures in dark clothing moving through the city streets, their faces hidden but their movements unnaturally coordinated. These were taken near refugee safe houses just before families disappeared. "We think they're not entirely organic, some kind of hybrid beings or heavily modified humanoids." Kira suddenly spoke up from the truck, pointing at the tablet screen. The word was clearly recognizable despite the accent: Collectors. The fear in those large eyes was unmistakable. Elena returned to Kira's side, pulling out a device that looked like a combination scanner and translator. "This might help us communicate better," she explained. As she activated the device, it began emitting soft sounds that seemed to resonate with Kira's natural speech patterns. After a few moments of adjustment, Kira's voice came through the device with startling clarity. "They took my mother. She fought them when they came for me, so they hurt her. I heard them say she was too damaged now, not worth keeping." The child's voice broke slightly. "They threw me away to die, but my mother is still alive." The device. "In my arm, I cut it out myself so they cannot find me, but now I cannot find her either." The garage fell silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the distant sound of traffic. Dave felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, a familiar feeling from his military days when the mission became personal. Torres was the first to speak. "Kira, do you know where they took your mother?" "A ship," Kira replied through the translator. "Hidden above the clouds. They keep the prisoners there until they have enough to fill the cargo holds." The child looked directly at Dave. "You saved me from the garbage place. Will you help me save her?" Dave didn't hesitate. "Yes," Sarah smiled grimly. "Then you're going to need to see the rest of our operation. And Kira, you're going to need to help us understand exactly what we're up against." Marcus led them deeper into the garage, past the modified vehicles to a section that had been converted into what could only be described as a command center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout. The city, radio equipment hummed quietly in the background, occasionally crackling with coded transmissions. Maps covered a large table in the center, marked with red pins indicating refugee locations and black pins showing where families had disappeared. Kira's translator device interfaced seamlessly with the garage's computer systems, and within minutes, the child was providing details that made everyone in the room increasingly uncomfortable. The orbital ship wasn't just a transport vessel. It was a mobile processing facility where captured beings were sorted, categorized, and prepared for sale to various clients across the galaxy. Some were destined for labor camps, others for scientific experimentation, and the most unfortunate were earmarked for entertainment purposes that none of the humans wanted to think about too closely. Elena had been monitoring communications frequencies and suddenly straightened at her console. "We've got movement. Multiple vehicles converging on the downtown area, specifically around building 847. She looked up grimly. "They're going back to where Dave found Kira." Torres moved to another monitor that showed thermal imaging from one of their surveillance drones. 3 vehicles, non-standard configuration. The heat signatures inside don't read as entirely human. He enhanced the image, revealing elongated forms that moved with unsettling coordination. Definitely collectors. Dave watched the screen with growing anger. "They're looking for her." Sarah nodded. "And when they don't find her, they'll expand their search. Every refugee safe house in the city is now compromised." She began typing rapidly on her keyboard. "I'm sending out evacuation signals to all our contacts." Kira spoke up through the translator, the young voice carrying a weight of knowledge that no child should possess. "They will not stop searching. The collectors never abandon valuable assets. And now that one of their tracking devices has been removed, they will assume there's organized resistance." Marcus looked up from a device he'd been examining. "Speaking of that tracking device, I've been analyzing the fragments Kira provided. This technology is unlike anything we've encountered before. It's not just a locator. It's designed to monitor and influence brain chemistry, essentially keeping the subjects docile and compliant." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a dark cloud. Torres was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. "If Kira's mother is still wearing one of those devices, she may not recognize me," Kira finished quietly. "Or she may be programmed to fear me, to see me as a threat to her safety. The child's large eyes filled with something that might have been tears. But the programming is not permanent. If the device is removed quickly enough, the natural brain patterns return. Elena's communication equipment suddenly erupted with urgent chatter. Multiple voices were reporting in. Refugee families confirming they had received evacuation signals and were moving to secondary safe houses, but interspersed with those reports were more ominous messages. 3 families had gone silent. Their safe houses were dark, and collector vehicles were being spotted throughout the city with increasing frequency. Dave found himself studying the tactical displays with the same intensity he'd once brought to military operations. How many refugees are we talking about? Sarah consulted her records. 43 confirmed, probably twice that many who are staying hidden on their own. They come from at least 6 different worlds, all fleeing the same threat. Torres highlighted areas on the map where collector activity was heaviest. They're conducting a systematic sweep, starting from where Kira was found and expanding outward. In a grid pattern, military precision. As if summoned by his words, every monitor in the command center suddenly flickered and went dark. The radio chatter cut off abruptly. Even the backup power system seemed to hesitate before kicking in. When the screens came back online, they were displaying something that made everyone in the room freeze. A face filled the central monitor. Humanoid in basic structure, but wrong in every detail that mattered. The skin had a metallic sheen that shifted color in the light. The eyes were too large, too dark, and completely without warmth. When it spoke, the voice was perfectly modulated but utterly inhuman. Inhabitants of this facility, you are harboring stolen property belonging to the Collective Harvesting Consortium. Return the juvenile specimen designated as Asset 447, and your involvement in this matter will be overlooked. Kira made a sound of pure terror and pressed closer to Dave. The translation device wasn't needed to understand the fear in that reaction. The face on the screen continued without pause. You have 1 standard planetary hour to comply. Failure to return our property will result in the immediate termination of all organic assets currently in our possession, followed by appropriate measures to eliminate this resistance cell. The transmission cut off, leaving the garage in stunned silence. Elena was the first to move, frantically checking her equipment. They didn't just hack our systems. They completely bypassed every security protocol we have. That should be impossible. Marcus was running diagnostics on multiple computers simultaneously. They're not just technologically advanced. They're operating on principles we don't understand. Look at this. He pointed to streams of data that made no sense according to human computer science. They didn't break our encryption. They simply ignored it, as if our security measures were irrelevant. Torres stood at the tactical display, his expression grim. 1 hour isn't enough time to evacuate everyone, and even if it was, they've demonstrated they can track us wherever we go. Sarah looked around the room at her team, then at Dave and Kira. We always knew this day might come. The question is, whether we run and try to save who we can, or whether we take the fight to them. Dave, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice, spoke into the heavy silence. What would it take to reach that ship? Elena looked up from her communication console. Theoretically, we'd need a way to get past Earth's atmospheric defenses without triggering every alert system on the planet. We'd need spacecraft capable of reaching orbital altitude, and we'd need a way to penetrate whatever defenses the collectors have around their mobile facility. Marcus nodded slowly. Theoretically, we have solutions for 2 out of 3 of those problems. Torres raised an eyebrow. We have spacecraft? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the transmission, it was a real smile. Marcus, I think it's time to show them Project Midnight. She led them to a section of the garage that Dave hadn't noticed before, concealed behind what appeared to be a solid wall. Sarah pressed her palm against a hidden scanner, and the wall slid aside, to reveal a space that defied the building's external dimensions. Suspended from the ceiling by a network of support cables was something that had clearly started life as human technology, but had been extensively modified with components that definitely weren't terrestrial. The basic frame looked like it might once have been a military transport, but additional sections had been grafted on using materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Kira gasped and spoke rapidly through the translator. "That is a rescue ship. My people built those to evacuate refugees from dangerous worlds, but this one has been changed, made stronger." Marcus beamed with pride. "We've been working on her for 6 months. Human engineering combined with refugee technology, powered by a fusion reactor we liberated from a decommissioned submarine. She's not pretty, but she get us where we need to go." Dave walked slowly around the vessel, taking in the modifications. "Will she fight?" Sarah's smile turned predatory. "Dave, she's equipped with enough firepower to level a city block. The question isn't whether she can fight. The question is whether we're ready for war." The hybrid vessel cut through Earth's atmosphere like a knife through silk, its alien-enhanced engines producing no heat signature that human or collector sensors could detect. Dave sat in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on controls that had been modified to respond to human reflexes. Sarah monitored the weapon systems while Torres coordinated with Alana's ground team. Kira sat strapped into a specially modified seat. The child's translator device interfaced directly with the ship's navigation computer. They found the collector vessel exactly where Kira had predicted, a massive dark shape hidden behind sophisticated cloaking technology. But the refugee modifications to their ship allowed them to see through the deception. The orbital facility was enormous, easily the size of a small city, with docking bays that could accommodate dozens of smaller craft. Sarah armed the weapons systems as they approached, multiple targets. "I count at least 30 smaller ships docked to the main structure." The collectors had clearly been busy, and this was just one of their operations. Dave brought them in fast and low, using an approach vector that would take them directly into the facility's blind spot. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Kira would use her biological connection to the ship's systems to locate her mother and disable the security protocols while the humans provided cover and eliminated any resistance. The docking bay they selected was empty, suggesting the collectors weren't expecting visitors. As soon as they made contact with the alien ship, Kira's eyes began to glow with a soft blue light. The child's consciousness was interfacing directly with the massive vessel's computer network, searching through thousands of prisoner records for one specific signature. Torres and Sarah moved through the corridors like the trained soldiers they were, their weapons modified with alien technology that could penetrate collector armor. The facility's inhabitants responded to the intrusion with mechanical precision, but they hadn't anticipated the fury of humans fighting to protect a child. Dave stayed with Kira as the young alien navigated the ship's systems. When they finally located Neva, she was in a medical facility deep within the vessel, surrounded by other prisoners who had been deemed too damaged for sale. The reunion was everything they had hoped for and fought to achieve. The escape was chaos incarnate. Alarms blared throughout the facility as they fought their way back to their ship with nearly 50 freed prisoners. The collectors pursued them with relentless determination, but human ingenuity combined with refugee desperation proved to be an unstoppable force. As they broke free of the orbital facility and headed for Earth, Dave looked back at the burning wreckage they had left behind. The collectors would think twice before returning to the system. And somewhere in the depths of space, other refugee ships would receive the message that Earth was a world where the innocent were protected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.